Welcome. Scott here. Here is a quick boss guide for the upcoming LUFENIA Plus World of Illusions event, Divine Ifrit. The event super synergy units are Noel and Serah from Final Fantasy XIII, Onion Knight from Final Fantasy III along with Cid Highwind from Final Fantasy VII. The event will mark the debut of the C90 Awakenings when these characters will get upgraded AA and X abilities with new crystal passives. The characters who are getting their C90 Awakenings are Noel, Serah, Onion Knight, and Cid. Noel Burst and Cid Highwind's LD will also be making their debut. Both Noel and Onion Knight's Burst will be realizable. We will be fighting the Divine Ifrit, which has 28 million HP. The Ifrit absorbs fire and has innate defenses that reduce HP damage from launches by 150%. The Ifrit can summon an unkillable fireball which has 10 million HP. The fire is immune to launch and also absorbs fire. The turn requirement is 70. The HP requirements is 40,000. Before I continue further, here is a small disclaimer clause for the video. The guide is written based on the time that the event was released for the Japanese version. Please do note that it is possible that the boss fight mechanics might differ when the actual event is released in global. Firstly, let's go through the LUFENIA Plus Orb Conditions. There are two types of LUFENIA Plus Orb for the fight. Both orb countdown abilities are not fatal. As you see, I have done a flowchart diagram to illustrate the orb movement. At any point in time for the fight, only one orb will be active. The orb starts off on the fireball. Upon its trigger, it will switch to the orb on Ifrit. Once the countdown ability has been triggered or the orb counter has reached 35, the orb will switch back to the fireball. The cycle repeats until the end of the fight. Let's start with the fireball LUFENIA Plus Orb. The orb will start with the counter of 20. The orb will tick down by 1 for action your party take and uptick by for every action the fireball takes. The orb is not cancelable. For the Ifrit LUFENIA Plus Orb, it will decrease by 1 when your party and increase by 3 when Ifrit act. The orb will be cancelled when the counter reaches 35 and it will activate the orb for the fireball. The same thing will also happen when orb countdown ability is triggered. To uptick the orb, you need to fulfill one of the conditions. If you cancel the break on Ifrit on your turn, it will be uptick the orb by 1. The orb will uptick by 2 if Ifrit receive Wind Brave damage from an additional attack. Do note that counters are excluded. To fulfill the first condition, you need to unbreak the boss. Units that have the ability are Noel, Arthen, Vayne, Tidus, Cloud of Darkness, Arania, Palem, Strago, Gabrynth and Lightning. Jet also fulfill the condition, but fire absorption will make it harder for him to fulfill this condition. For the second condition, only Cid Highwind meets the orb if you have his LD. However, you can make your own form of orb fulfilling by pairing a wind enchanter and with a unit that has additional attack in their kits. Due to the fight mechanics, you will most likely give the boss a turn to act. The boss will uptick the orb when they act, so it is also possible to go through the fight without any unit that fulfill the orb condition. There is a one-time special count trigger if the Ifrit's HP is below 50%. If that condition is triggered, after the Ifrit's countdown ability is triggered or the orb on Ifrit has reached 35, the 5-count orb appear on the fireball. This is followed by an instant trigger of the countdown ability Flames Plus. After that, the orb will reappear back on Ifrit with a counter of 5. Firstly, let's go through the LUFENIA Plus Orb Conditions. There are two types of LUFENIA Plus Orb for the fight. Both orb countdown abilities are not fatal. Now let's proceed with some party setup recommendations. Recommended calls abilities. To ensure that you are able to constantly break them, it is important to inflict defense down debuffs. Example of calls abilities that inflict defense down debuffs are Ferris, Jack and Tidus. As the boss has a huge amount of HP damage up debuff calls like Karasame, Gabrynth, Ignis, and Maria are useful. Although a bit trickier to use, aura type HP damage up calls like Queen and Kumari are also viable. For every 10 actions taken, the fireball will grant Ifrit a HP regen buff that heals it by 370k per turn. To avoid it becoming too much of a nuisance, it might be your interest to dispel the buff. You can consider bringing a dispel call for the fight. They are bald here: Cloud, Shellcat, Vanille, Paris, Beatrix, Cid Highwind and Pain. Next, I will be covering units that will be useful to handle the fight mechanics. Like other LUFENIA Plus events, it is always recommended to bring supports for their aura and buffs. They are Purim, Setzer, Agrias, Katesith, Ishtala, Bartz, Lena and Serah. As the fight features a constant AoE HP attacks, bringing a damage mitigator is highly recommended. Options include Snow, Core, Gladiolus, Warrior of Light, Orin, Zac, Bash, and Beatrix. The boss has an AoE attack that does AoE delay. Thus, units who has counter will help the boss from gaining too many consecutive turns. If you don't bring them, consider bring them as a call ability. 9 and Warrior of Light offers pretty decent option for call abilities. For additional attack options, you can consider Cid Highwind, Machina, Kane, Shadow, Jegran, Noctis, and Prompto. Core and Beatrix also have additional attacks in their kit. Other than Cid, all other options need to be enchanted with Wind to uptick the orb. Wind enchanter options are Bartz with his burst aura and Fujin. Fujin LDCA offers 9-turn wind enchant utility. The boss Divine Hellfire Plus has instant breaks and deal a 2-turn delay when it is triggered. Having counter abilities or traps will help to keep the boss brave under controlled. Options are Ace, Maria, Trey, and the Emperor. However, to avoid any unnecessary KO, it is still better to deploy a tank like Snow, Zac, Bash, Warrior of Light or Orin. As the Ifrit has strong defenses against launch, we can't cheese the fight with Sidma combo. Idaroth works for the fight, but that requires a specific setup to work along with damage mitigation calls like Reno LDCA, Setzer Freeze Joker and 9 LDCA. On the screen, you will see a timeline showing the HP thresholds triggers that you need to watch out for. Other than the standard LUFENIA Plus aura boosts, Ifrit will trigger an additional attack Divine Hellfire Plus where it will be triggered at 90%, 70%, 50%, 30%, and 10% HP threshold. When the orb is active on Ifrit, the Scorch Field effect will be activated. Ifrit will summon the Fireball at turn 0 and the orb phase will start off with Fireball's orb. The orb triggers are another thing that you need to watch out for, which I will explain more in depth in the later slides. The Fireball is unkillable, so don't bother to focus on it too much unless you need to shave its Brave. It will use Flames and AoE Brave plus HP attack on its turn. For every 10 actions you take, the Fireball will grant a 10-turn HP regen buff and inflicts 5-turn framed fire resist down debuff on your allies. The HP regen will restores 370k HP whenever Ifrit takes a turn. Overall, this fight isn't too difficult, but it is not that easy that you can cheese it with boss no turns. Understanding the boss mechanics will help you to handle the fight a lot better. I will highly recommend you to bring a tank for the fight. Now let's proceed with the boss mechanics proper. Like the previous LUFENIA Plus fights, the boss will gain big stats boosts when you deplete their HP to a certain threshold. The thresholds trigger for this fight is at the start of the fight, 79% HP threshold and 49% HP thresholds. At the start of the fight, it will boost its defense stats by 200%. At 79% HP threshold, it will further boost its defense stats to 300%. Unlike other LUFENIA Plus fights, the Brave damage reduction auras is pretty minimum and the highest is only 30%. When the orb is active on the Ifrit, the Scorch Field effect will be activated. When the effect is active, the Fireball will be engulfed in the flames. Ifrit's turn will become framed and it will be immune to delay, including breaks, and turn deletion. It will further reduce launch damage by another 200%, effectively reducing launch damage by 350%. It will inflict a max brave, initial brave and max HP down auras. The effect of the aura will be weaker if you have 4 or more debuffs on Ifrit. The frame turns will be removed when the orb is activated on the fireball. Now, I will be covering the boss key mechanics in detail. Firstly, I will explain on the LUFENIA Plus cycle and how it works. Upon summoning the fireball on its first turn, the fireball orb will start off at the counter 20. The cycle will officially start when the counter drops to 0 for the fireball. When the counter reaches 0, the fireball will use its countdown ability Flames Plus, where it will deal an AoE Brave plus HP attack, and it will reduce all debuffs duration by 4 turns. So, avoid refreshing your debuffs when the countdown ability is about to trigger. The orb will appear on Ifrit with the counter of 20. The Scorch Field effect will be active. Moving on to the second phase, there are 2 possibilities. It is either the orb attack triggered or the counter reaches 35. Even without any orb fulfilling utility in your party, the orb will uptick on its own whenever Ifrit takes its turn. With its turn being framed and immune to turn delay or deletion, Ifrit will uptick the orb by 3 whenever it takes a turn. The countdown ability is a Brave Gain, AoE Brave plus HP attack that inflicts 4 debuffs. Depending on Ifrit's current HP condition, you can activate the special effect counter, or the orb will reappear at back on the fireball with the counter of 20. The special effect condition will be activated when Ifrit's HP is below 50%. Once it is triggered, the fireball orb will appear at the count of 5. The fireball will use its countdown ability, Flames Plus, and the orb will go back to Ifrit with the count of 5. To make the fight easier, when you have Ifrit trigger the countdown ability or orb counter is at 35, make sure that Ifrit's HP is at least 50% and above. This way, you will avoid the special counter trigger. Now let's focus on Ifrit's partner in crime, the fireball. The fireball has 10 million HP. It is unkillable object that is immune to launch. Like Ifrit, it also absorbs fire. On its turn, it will use flames, which is AoE Brave plus HP attack. The fireball will be summoned on turn 0. This also means that starting debuffs won't get applied on the fireball and you need to apply them. Apply sap or poison debuff will help to keep its brave in check. Don't bother to attack it unless you need to shave its brave. For every 10 actions you take, you will see the following message: flames are getting stronger. Ifrit will gain a 10-turn HP regen buff and the party will get inflict a 5-turn framed fire resist down debuff. As mentioned earlier, the HP regen buff is quite potent as it heals Ifrit by 370k per turn. So, it is important to bring a dispeller to remove the buff. I have listed down the dispellers. Alternatively, you can block off the buff slots with 8 framed debuffs. The countdown ability is unavoidable as you can't uptick it unless you keep giving the fireball turns. When it triggered, it will unleash Flames Plus, which is an AoE Brave plus HP attack. It will also reduce the duration of all debuffs by 4 turns on the boss. Ifrit has an off-turn attack called Divine Hellfire Plus, where it will trigger for every 20% HP lost after the 90% HP threshold. The HP thresholds to watch out for the 90%, 70%, 50%, 30%, and 10%. The attack is a Brave Gain, inflicts instant break on the entire party and followed up with an AoE Brave plus HP attacks that delays the entire party by 2 turns. When the attack is triggered, it won't uptick Ifrit's orb. The attack will trigger even if Ifrit's action has been disabled. If you have breached the threshold while in the summon or burst phase, the attack will be delayed and executes once you exit out of the phase. If you pass the threshold and breach the next threshold, Ifrit will unleash Divine Hellfire Plus back to back. Avoid trigger that, otherwise you will potentially face a 4-turn delay. As the attacks have guaranteed breaks, it is important to have off-turn damage, traps or counters, so you can break Ifrit. I will highly recommend you to bring a tank for the fight. Now I have reached the last slide of my boss guide presentation. Here is a survival toolkit summary for the fight. 1. Bring a tank. The fight features a lot of damage from the bosses. The boss's Divine Hellfire Plus, from 90% for every 20% HP lost, has an AoE 2-turn delay. Bring a tank will help to save you a lot of problems. Tanks that are usable for the fight are Warrior of Light, Zac, Bash, Gladiolus, Snow, and Orin. 2. Bring a Dispeller or block all buff slots with frame debuffs. For every 10 actions taken, the Fireball will grant the party a 370k HP regen buff, 10 turns. If the buff is not dispelled, the fight will be a prolonged misery. You can also equip a Vanille Sphere on units that inflicts break often. Examples of units that can be deployed for Dispel utility is Cid and Beatrix. You also deploy these units if you have Vanille Sphere equipped on them, Noel, Arden, Vayne, and Arania. 3. Bring Rebreakers or Wind Enchant. I have listed down the units that rebreak utility. To considerably uptick the orb you need to have follow-up Wind Brave attacks. Cid is the only unit that fulfilled this criterion. However, you can deploy a Wind Enchanter in the party like Bartz or Fujin to make your follow-up to fulfill the orb. Bart's burst needs to be at least level 2 limit break to be a party Wind Enchanter with his BT aura. Fujin also works as an LDCA as well. I have come to the end of my boss guide presentation. Hopefully you find it useful. If you like the video, please give a like. Please subscribe to my channel for future gaming content. Good luck for the fight in the coming days. Bye.